Good afternoon. We're going to continue our study on the lines simply presented. And I know lots of people have been watching them online. There's not many people here today, but we're going to go through some of these details and in how we understand these lines. So before we begin, can we have a word of prayer? Dear Father in heaven, we are very thankful for the time that we have here to study this afternoon. We ask for your Holy Spirit to speak to our hearts, to teach us. We pray for those watching these videos online that they can understand what's being presented, that I can present it in a way that's understandable. And we pray, Lord, that your Holy Spirit can work on our characters, that the light that we receive, that we can respond to it and obey it. Be with us now as we open your word together as our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to have some Greek there in front of us, which we don't need to look at. And now when we're addressing these lines, I just want to do a little bit of a review. And this review goes to Isaiah 28. So this is where we first started. Now we know that in creating these lines, it's based upon this principle of precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line. Now, when I did the initial study, I just addressed the meaning of that. Precept means to set in order. The line is a measuring line, and here and here, from here and here is what the Hebrew says, or there and there. And it can refer to time. So what we're doing is we're setting in order upon a line of judgment, a measuring line, these waymarks. Now, we know that these, when we read this, it talks about these false prophets who have erred in wine and strong drink. They stumble in judgment. The tables are full of vomit and filthiness, so that there is no place clean. And then the question is, whom shall he teach knowledge? And whom shall he make to understand doctrine? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breasts. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, here a little and there a little. This progression also of truth from a child who is now growing. But it says, for with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to this people, to whom he said, this is the rest wherewith ye may cause the weary to rest, and this is the refreshing. Yet they would not hear. So we talked about this period of darkness, and we can see that this line is given to a people who do not have understanding. They're drunk. So they need to be reformed. And then it says, but the word of the Lord was unto them, precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, here a little and there a little, that they might go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. And my understanding of this verse is that since they have rejected knowledge, or if they reject this knowledge, they will experience these lines. Does that make sense?
Can you say it again?
Okay. So God gives us lines, line upon line. Now, if we follow that, we can be instructed. We can have knowledge. We can understand doctrine.
Correct.
But if we reject those lines, what those lines are prophecies of what will happen to God's people who reject the lines.
Absolutely.
So the lines will be to them, that is, they're going to experience this history, whether either you study it and are prepared for that history, or you reject it and you experience that history as a judgment from God.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So then when he says, behold, I lay in Zion for a foundation stone, this is Isaiah 28:16, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. He that believeth shall not make haste. Judgment also will I lay to the line, and righteousness to the plummet. So that's the The vertical lines are the plummet. Those are the waymarks. So that's righteousness. So the waymarks represent righteousness. The line itself represents judgment. And then it says, and the hail shall sweep away the refuge of lies. Now, of course, this is referring to verse 15, talking about the covenant they made with death. So we can see that these lines are reformatory, but they're also judgments. They serve, in a sense, two purposes. I mean, it's really the same purpose. Either you're reformed by the line or you receive judgment from that line. You're going to pass through that history. So, so when we were addressing, and I'm going to go to the whiteboard here. So when we were addressing these lines, we addressed the period of darkness. And we also addressed the time of the end. So I have to stop sharing. Just hang on. So, right, remember you have the darkness. And then we have the time of the end. So this time of the end is the end of a time prophecy, and we're going to look at that a little bit more. We had touched on it before, but we're going to look at that a bit more when we deal with some of these other lines. But if we're going to look at 1798, we know that this is the end of the 1260 and the 2520 for the papacy, and then for northern Israel. And then we also know that the 1290 ends here as well. So there's basically three prophecies. These are part of the same prophecy. The 1260 is just the latter half of the 2520, but most people are familiar with the 1260 for the papacy. And so they end in 1798. And we know that this is, February 15th. So that's going to be when Miller is 16. He turned 16 there, if I remember correctly. I was thinking it was 17 before.
Someone has their hand up.
Iran, you have a question? Your hand's up.
No.
Is that intentional?
I don't remember clicking on anything.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so and then we addressed that there's this idea of the first message. So the first message is going to be formalized, and then it's going to be empowered. And the first message, right? So we're going to have first angel. First angel's message is formalized. First angel's message is empowered. But we also had all of this dealing with the increase of light of Miller. That is, when we looked at William Miller, we could zoom in on Miller himself and see that there is a reform line that addresses William Miller. But that reform line also includes up to the formalization of this message, 1833, when he's going to receive his credentials. But his personal reform line does it have the first angel's message being empowered? That is, how did they understand August 11th, 1840? How did Miller understand it? What did they think was going to happen here? when they first make this prediction about August 11th. Okay, they believed that this was a close of probation. Okay. So is it a close of probation?
As far as the testing process goes, it could be.
Okay, so even though it's an empowerment, it's a close of probation. And then Miller's also going to be predicting the second coming, right? I'm going to put the second coming here. And where's the extremity of Miller's prediction?
1843
Okay, so
at the end of the year.
yeah, the end of the year, Jewish year 1843. Now, originally it was 1843, just January to December 31st. When he gets it to the end, December of 1842, he says that it's actually going to be from March 21st, 1843 to March 21st, 1844. And so some people just stick with that. They say that's what Miller said, so it's going to be March 21st, 1844. But we're going to put that this is, put Sunday law there, but it's second coming.
Right.
So this is going to be April 19th, really, when it starts at sunset. That's going to be the end of the Jewish year, 1843. And so in Miller's personal line, if you look at Miller, and we're just going to even put back here, February 15th. So what year was he born? 1782. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Which has all the numbers of July 18, 2020 in it. But so 1782, he's born. When he's 16, he receives his concordance, maybe on his birthday. I understand now that they don't actually have his original concordance. It was seen by James White, but somehow that original concordance disappeared. So they don't have it any longer. So they just have the account of James White where he said it was originally purchased for $8 in 1798. So, and they had a family Bible as well that was purchased for $18.50 or something like that. But if we look at this, this can be Miller's personal reform line. That is, we could take events in here and lay them out and say, this is, well, there's a period of darkness before he's born, right? Because he doesn't exist. And this could be the time of the end of the period of darkness when he's born, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we could lay out events here that have to do with his experience, but his line, his prophecy is only going to go up to here.
Okay.
And so you can see the close of probation and the second coming. And also here we're going to have the midnight cry, which is that message of Miller in this period, which once they get to the end of this, snow is going to begin the true midnight cry. So in a sense, this close of probation here is almost like the Sunday law as well, because it's followed by the midnight cry. So we could take Miller's line and do this. And so what we're doing is we're zooming into a waymark, and waymarks on lines above this line can become waymarks on a line, this line below it. And we saw this when we did in our more detailed study, when we looked at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Each of them had a reform line, but a waymark in Abraham's reform line might exist in Isaac's reform line, but it would serve a different purpose as a reform line. So this idea that we can zoom in is one of the main principles that we've learned, that reform lines exist everywhere in the scriptures. But reform lines don't just exist by themselves. They exist because there is a larger reform line. Now, I'm just going to go and take a different tack here. So when we started our study of reform lines, we actually dealt with the period of darkness being the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. So this was the time of the beginning. And we have light that's given, an increase of light. And we went through each of the days of creation and showed that they represented a reform line. And so, this would be the first day. And God's going to separate from the light from the darkness he calls night, the light he calls day. There's evening and morning one day. And then you're going to have a second day, right? And each of these days here, there's going to be a division. The firmament above and the firmament below, right? So there's the waters are going to be separated, right? And then you're going to have the land and the waters separated. So you're going to have the seas and the dry land, the Eretz. So there's going to be these three steps. And this is the first angel's message, which has to do with an increase of light and these dividing, this result, the laying of the foundation of the earth that's going to result. And then you're going to have the fourth day, which is going to be Wednesday, right? So on Wednesday, we're going to have the sun and the moon and the stars, and they're going to be for signs, for seasons, for days and years. Now you're going to have plants also created on this day. So the sun isn't going to be created till after the plants are created. So, these obviously can't be periods of thousands of years. Because if you created plants here and there's no sun and moon and stars, well, they wouldn't survive. But that's a whole other story. And then you're going to have each of these days of creation. This one here is going to be the fishes. I think, where is the fishes created? Can't remember now.
Birds and fishes are the same day.
Or this is the fishes are here when the seas are done? Birds and fishes. I think birds and fishes are here. And then, of course, on the sixth day, you have the animals that breathe are created here. And then, of course, you have the seventh day where they rest. So you can see that this is a reform line. And the center of this reform line, if you want to put it, the arrival of the second angel's message, is the sun and the moon and the stars. And I don't want to go into a long detail about each of these symbols, but this is the center of a chiasm, right? This is the cross. And the sun and the moon and the stars are symbols of prophecy pointing forward to Christ. And that's why those are created on that day. Now, this is also our personal experience in becoming a Christian, where we're in darkness of sin, light comes to us, and we go through this separation of light and darkness. We start to see truth from error. We see our sins. God is correcting us. And then the heaven and the earth are separated, right? The waters, right, from the heavens. And then the land and the waters are separated here. And these can represent different things in our experience. But then when we get here, this is where this first preparatory, the laying of the foundation of the Christian life, which is all about these divisions, because we start to become separated from the world. Then prophecy comes to play, because we're now going to have to experience this faith that we had here is laying a foundation to understand prophecy. So a Christian who just goes through this experience, they get the foundation laid, but they don't continue to grow in understanding. That is, when this test comes, prophecy comes to them. I'm not saying that prophecy can't come at the beginning, but this is where they now start to be tested by prophecy. And so there's a lot more symbols here that we're not going to address right now. The point that I'm making is in every reform line, we have this darkness. We have the time of the end, or in this case, the time of the beginning. And then we're going to have this progression, this reformatory line, this reformatory movement. Now this is, of course, the beginning of a line. So if we want to look at the line of creation, we also know that if this is creation, we also have at the end here recreation. That is, this is the heavens and the earth, and this is the new heavens and the new earth. And we're going to see these. Now, even though we take this period of 6,000 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years, right? Going all the way to here, we know that there's going to be the millennium. Now, of course, this new heaven and this new earth aren't created at the beginning of the millennium. This whole thing is a process of the creation, the recreation of the new heaven and the new earth, right? Because the earth is going to be destroyed. And this itself is a reform line. That is, we could go here and look at this history and see a reform line here. Right? So when we get to, this is the first day, second day, third day, fourth day, sixth day, we have the seventh day. So, I mean, if I'm putting these at the start of the days, that's how we would look at it. And the seventh day is going to be rest. Now, in this case, what's going to rest? During the millennium.
The earth.
Yeah, so the earth is going to rest during the millennium. Right, so it has to rest before it's recreated, because the land has to keep her Sabbath, right? So this is a sabbatical cycle of thousands of years. So each one of these days of creation aren't 1,000 years, but they do typify periods of thousands of years. Now, of course, when we look at these waymarks, we know that the flood isn't it's gonna happen in 1656 years from creation. But we would normally place these different waymarks as these events in Earth history. So here we would put the flood, right? And so we're going to have this history, this line, and I'm not going to go into it right now. Now, some people try to take this very literally. That is, they want to have each of these 1,000 years being marked by an event. Now, one is, when Jesus was crucified, there are people who want to have him crucified and it be exactly 2,000 years from the crucifixion to the second coming, right? And we know that Usher, he had creation in 4004 BC, and then he's going to have Christ's birth in 4 BC. But we know that that's not correct. But he was using this idea of that there's 7,000 years. Now, when did his 6,000 years end? If 4004 BC was the creation, where did 6,000 years end?
1996.
Yeah, so 1996, right? So this would be 1996. Now, it used to be that Christians really liked Usher's date because, especially in the 90s or the 80s, because they were saying, well, the world's going to end in 1996. Christ is going to come back because that's 4,000 years from creation. But what happened within Christianity after 1996 is people started to shorten this period because people still want to have Jesus come back exactly 6,000 years from creation. Now, what are some problems with that conclusion? What are some things that would be a problem with saying it needs to be 6,000 years from creation, and that we're going to just keep changing the date of creation so that the second coming of Christ is still in the future? There's a few problems. What's one of them?
You would be like a type of time setting.
Okay, it's a type of time setting. Okay. But do we mark 6,000 years from creation or 6,000 years of sin?
Well, I think Ellen White, she does say 6,000 years from sin,
Okay, yeah. So,
but I think she does also say like other statements about 6,000 years relating from creation. Would that be correct?
yeah, but so she sometimes just rounds off to 6,000 years. Because interestingly, when she talks sometimes about dates in the past, she will say, something happened 500 years before Christ was born. But sometimes she'll say it's 500 years before the cross. And of course, there's an extra 30 years in there. So when she's doing some of her statements, they are rounded off statements. But it's pretty clear that she sees that sin obviously occurred not at the day of creation. And she talks about 4,000 or 6,000 years of sin. But we don't know when Adam and Eve sinned. Now, I mean, we can speculate on it, but we just don't know. So there's a question there about the origin of sin itself. When did it occur? Now, another thing is that we obviously have 46 BC for the creation. So this is Usher. And this is me. So that's what I have. And so that's going to be 42 years difference. So, here we would have this then be 1964, right? If we're going to go from creation itself. But people keep wanting to push creation this way so they can have, it in the future, the 6,000 years. But of course, we don't know what it is, whether it's from sin or from creation. I would say it would be 6,000 years of sin that are going to then be marked. Now, why would I say it's 6,000 years of sin? What would be a good argument for that? Because if we're using this as a type, when does darkness begin if I'm going to start this 6,000 years or the 7,000 years?
Darkness starts at the origination of sin.
Okay, so God creates the world. If there's no sin, there's no darkness, there's no way that 6,000 years begins, right?
Right.
Do people agree?
Yeah, we know that sin is at least occurred before. Well, Seth was 130 years
Yeah.
after creation, and then before that was Cain and Abel.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know exactly, but we know they were adults anyway. We don't know exactly how old they were, but the understanding is that they would be probably about 30, 40 years old, whatever. So you can go back. So maybe we don't know how long it was without sin, but it probably wouldn't be more than 100 years.
Yeah.
Since creation.
Yeah. So we could say no, definitely not more than 100 years, and probably less than that. Maybe it was 70 years, right?
Well, 70 years, I have an interesting theory.
Okay, what's your interesting?
Okay. So I think in 2026 or around that time, or 25,
Yeah,
we are 6,000 years and 6,070 years from creation.
okay,
So I'm just thinking, if the millennium, we in a sense, if the millennium was to occur after 6,000 years, we've kind of, in a sense, borrowed time from that. And if there was going to be, if God the Lord was going to go return, whatever, if he had allotted like an extra 70 years probation, in a sense, to the earth, and maybe borrowed it from the millennium, that would leave the millennium being 930 years long rather than 1,000 years, which kind of mirrors Adam living for 930 years. So you have 930 years at the beginning and then 930 years at the end. Just a thought.
yeah, and so there's lots that God hasn't really shown us, but we do see these structures exist, and there are hints of them. The thing that I can say is that we can't use the 6,000 years to predict when Jesus is going to return, because we don't have all the information. Now, of course,
We're not supposed to predict when Jesus.
right, but I don't think that information was given us, right? So we don't have that exact chronology of when sin began, so that we can count it out. So there could be other possibilities. Now, the other thing is, we know that time is, in some ways, time's going to be shortened, but also God's mercy is being extended, correct?
Yes.
So how do we understand those seemingly two contradictory concepts? Time being prolonged and time being shortened.
It's lengthened in the sense that God is merciful,
Okay, so God's merciful. He's going to give us some more time for a certain period.
but it's shortened in the sense that we're nearing the fill of our our probation and our, like, we're not improving, so therefore we're nearing the limit of our sinfulness.
Okay, so he's going to cut it short in righteousness. So both are able to be true. Okay, I just got an echo there. So I just wanted to go back and look at this and understand that that the idea of darkness, that here in the creation of the world, this darkness is chaos, right? Here, if we're going to deal with the 7,000 years, we really need to go to sin as the start of this. Now, even when we look at this period, there's a lot that goes on in here dealing with the patriarchs. We know that, we have Methuselah when he's born, we have Lamech when he's born, Noah when he's born. And these are precursors to the time of the flood. And actually, if we were going to look at a reform line of the flood, the reform line of the flood is not just the flood, it's actually the events that precede it.
Mm-hmm.
Would we agree with that?
Well, it would have to, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So when would the flood begin as a reform line?
Well, I would think the beginning of the 120 years.
Okay, so yeah, so we have 120 years in here.
Isn't it maybe even before them? Because people start getting wicked before then, and then God tells
Okay.
Noah to build the ark.
Right, so there's gonna be 120 years probationary period, or whatever you wanna call it, that exists. But we know that normally a reform line, the period of darkness, ends with a time prophecy. Right, but this is actually beginning a period of darkness with the time prophecy to the flood, right? So we're gonna have darkness here.
Appears that way. Sorry,
Somebody say something?
Stephen.
Yeah, the darkness being that the sons of God are now with the daughters of men.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. So it's not just the sin. So when we went through this before, we looked at the progressive destruction of 4, how we ended up getting to that period of darkness. And then we're gonna have this 120-year time prophecy. So we don't specifically have a time prophecy that starts this time of the end for the flood story. But we do have some prophesying because we have Enoch. Now, what is Enoch prophesying?
The second coming.
Yeah, so Enoch's prophesying the second coming, right? Way over here. So now we know Enoch's going to have a son, Methuselah, and Methuselah is going to die in the year of the flood, right?
Mhm.
When he dies, it shall come.
Mhm.
So how do we relate this flood then, this reform line, how do we relate it to the second coming, for one? Because in this history, are they looking in a sense for the second coming, which would be the first coming?
Yes, but they're mistaking it for the second coming when it's a type of the second coming.
Right. So they may not know all of this history.
No.
They
I don't
just
think
know
they
that
would.
that sin is going to be dealt with at some point.
I don't
Now
think-
here it's going to be dealt with water. At the end, it's going to be dealt with by fire.
I don't think they could understand it properly.
So we still have prophecies here. We just don't have a time prophecy marking the time of the end. But we can see that we have this connection, that this history in here is that we wouldn't just mark 1,000 years to the flood, because it's 16,056 years to the flood from creation. We don't know how long it is from when sin first originated. The only thing we do know is that there's going to be a prophecy of 120 years, and this is going to end when Noah is 600. So this prophecy is given when Noah's how old?
480.
Yeah, 480. And what was the significance of that, Stephen?
Well, it worked into like a chiasm where you had 480. Well, this is maybe not what you're thinking of. There was a chiasm with that 480 there, which kind of merged the 480 with the Solomon.
Yeah, the 480 was Solomon's temple. And so we had a span of time between these. And Solomon's temple is completed in what year?
1006. No, is it 1006?
Okay. And how
But
many?
I think it wasn't to this. It was to the start of that 1013 was the
So
end
when
of
he
the
lays
fourth.
the foundation, right. So he lays the foundation in 1013 BC.
Yes.
Yeah, so we know this is 2390 BC. So this is what year?
2510.
2510 BC, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So you have 480, then you have 120,
Yeah.
and then you had 120 was it, trying to think. So,
Wow.
I haven't got the diagram with me. I'd have to
Okay.
look at it. So,
We-
so I think it was 777 years was connected to the birth. Oh, right, okay. You had the birth of Moses. Before that, you had a 120 there. Moses
Yeah,
led to 120,
so I'm just gonna put it here. We're gonna
and
have,
then that was followed by 480
this is
from
Moses,
the,
right?
yes, and then you had 120 for him, and then that took you to the beginning of the 480 because it was coming out of crossing of the Jordan, coming out of Egypt to
Yeah,
the
so
salt.
this
the temple.
brings you to the period that's gonna start a period of 480 years.
Yeah, so you've got like a chiasm there. So you had 480 followed by 120. Now we have 120 followed by 480. And then between that time period was 777 years.
Right, so when you go between here and here, right, it's gonna be 777, is that what it is?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we got this 480, 120, and a 120 and 480.
Yeah.
Mhm. The midpoint was 2001 BC.
What
The flood?
The midpoint of the 777
Oh, okay.
of the whole structure. Yeah, the midpoint was 2001 BC.
okay. Now, we're doing a bunch of things. This is supposed to be the line simply presented, I realize. But what we're trying to understand here is that this history is very detailed. That is, when people approach prophecy, what I see is very simplistic approaches that people try to fit these lines in. But we can see that there is multitudes of connections. There's just all kinds of connections, structures that bring these together like a wheel within wheel. But if you try to play around with these structures, what would happen to these structures, Stephen? Would they exist?
They wouldn't work.
No, they wouldn't work. And so we're dependent upon these structures. But remember, the structure, the dates, the chronologies were given first, and then we found the structures. So what we want to look at now, so we've got all of this sort of background. So when we look at a reform line, again, we know that there's this darkness, and you have the time of the end, you have an increase of knowledge, you're going to have, so we're going to say this is the first, the second waymark, third waymark, and these are all under what we would call the first angel's message. Right?
Mhm.
So you have the first angel's message. It has 3 waymarks to it. And then you have this period. And of course, I probably should do this because the first angel's message ends when the 4th waymark happens. And then this is going to be the second angel's message. Right? And in Millerite history, we mark these, as 1798, 1833, August 11th, 1840, April 19th, 1844. This is July 21st, August 15th, and October 22. Right?
Mhm.
So why do we have this separation of the first and second angel's message? And why, when the third angel's message arrives, because we're going to look at this later as well. So I'm just trying to give this overall view. We have the first and second angel's message, the third angel's message arriving in Millerite, close of probation. But this is also a close of probation, right? And in Millerite history, this is the Protestants, and this is the Millerites who are being tested, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we believe that we're repeating Millerite history. And so when we draw our line, and we have this darkness over here, this is 1989. This is 1996. This is 9/11. This is 9/11. And this is midnight, which we don't know where it is. And this is the midnight cry. These are future. And then this is going to be the close of probation, right? Or I guess
Is it the Sunday law?
it's the Sunday law for Seventh-day Adventists, but it is a close of probation as well, just like the one above. So this is then the way that we
Your camera's tilting.
well, thanks. Okay. Okay, that's good there. So this is Seventh-day Adventists. And this is, okay, well, maybe we should look at it this way. Okay, who's being tested here? Let's ask this question instead of me telling you.
You already know the first part, Seventh-day Adventists.
Well, what particularly?
Church structure, the leadership.
So we'll just say the church. And we'll call this the people,
Okay.
right? Because I was going to put like the Seventh-day Adventist church and then the Seventh-day Adventist people, right? So the church structure itself, now I put this here as 9/11, just because we have these two 9/11s, they're still really one event. So when the church closes its probation, just like the Protestants did, it's actually going to happen at 9/11 itself. So, I don't know, because these are both 9/11. I'll just put it there. So in this case, if we're looking at this line, this 9/11 is actually 9/11. The church has closed its probation. But if we're looking at the people, there's another 9/11 in here. So I don't know how to represent it. Just because they're both the same event, but we'll just put it there like that. I mean, I could just put them together and just say, this is 9/11 or something like that. But this event here is August 11th, 1840. That's 9/11 where the message is empowered. Right, but also the church closes its probation because the second angel arrives at 9/11 as well. But can we see that this is actually two different lines?
Two different lines, as in one's the Millerites, one's.
No, even in here, when we have 9/11 serve one purpose and 9/11 serve another purpose, that it's actually two different lines that are being represented.
One line for the church, one line for the people.
No. Okay, let's look at it this way. So I'm gonna get rid of all this. So you got 1798. I'm just gonna put the 1, 2, and 3 here. Whoops. So this is gonna be April 19th. (1844), and this is going to be October 22, 1844. So these are when these angels arrive. Now, what does Ellen White see next on the line?
Sunday law.
Okay, so she sees the Sunday law, which is the 4th angel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then she sees the loud cry. And then she sees the close of probation, right? And then the 7 last plagues, and then the second coming, correct?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Just gonna move this. Okay. So that's what Ellen White sees. Now she's paralleling the loud cry and the Sunday law with the history in here. Sunday law would be parallel with July 18th or July 21st, 1844. And the loud cry would be parallel with the midnight cry, because that's what she does indirectly, right? She definitely gives that the midnight cry parallels the loud cry that comes after the Sunday law. So you have to have the Sunday law here somewhere. And we would call that midnight. So you have midnight, midnight cry. This is, in a sense, midnight, midnight cry on this big line. And you're going to have this 4th angel coming. In this history, we have what happens under the 2nd angel's message. What 2 messages are given?
Babylon is fallen.
Okay, so you got the bridegroom and Babylon is fallen, right? Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him, and Babylon. So in this history, we also have Babylon is fallen, right? And those messages then are the loud cry, if we want to put it this way. That is the loud cry. Is Babylon has fallen. Right? Come out of her, there's a call to come out of Babylon, which doesn't really happen under the 3rd angel or the 2nd angel's message here in this verse 3. So Ellen White looks at this line. If we look at what's happening here, we know that this history is going to be repeated in this history. Right? And here we have this Sunday law, loud cry, close of probation. But when we look at our line, it's going to have the Sunday law here. And the Sunday law is going to be the actual Sunday law. But we have this line that goes from 9/11, and then we have midnight and midnight cry. But we can see that this midnight cry comes before the Sunday law. Ellen White says the loud cry comes after the Sunday law. So in this line that we have 9/11. And what is 9/11 here?
April 19th.
So this is April 19th, right? So can't we see that this part of our line that we have developed is actually a zoom into another waymark that is separate from this line here, where we have 1989 as the time of the end, because this is a repeat of this history. And then when we have these events, we're going to have 1996, the formalization of the message, and then we're going to have August 11th, 1840, right? So that's going to be 9/11, right? So this is the empowerment. So you're going to have the first angel arrives, the first angel is formalized, and the first angel is empowered. It's here where the church's probation closes. Right? 9/11. But it's the empowerment of the first angel, but we say it's the arrival of the second angel. So the second angel also arrives in this history at 9/11. But can't we see that 9/11 shows up in two different reform lines?
Yes, I get your point.
Okay. So that this is actually a separate reform line. So
But
So
in
Ellen
a
White
sense,
has, what's that? Okay,
you were telling the church structure. That was the close of probation there was for the Protestants, lining up with the 19th of the 4th month, 19th of April.
okay, yeah. That's the
So
19th.
that,
Yeah.
so that was a close of probation for the Protestants. Are you kind of like, by saying it's August 11th, 1840,
Yeah,
you're sort of making, even though that wasn't a close of probation.
they thought it was.
Huh?
They thought it was a close of probation.
Yes. Maybe typified happened at April 19.
Okay, so when the Millerites looked at August 11th, 1840, they believed it was a close of probation. But it wasn't, though, in a sense, it typified that. And in our history, we can see that August 11th serves the same purpose. Now, they were looking at, of course, the close of probation before the second coming, right? Because they believed the second coming, they believed all these events were going to happen prior to Christ returning, because they needed the 7 last plagues and all this stuff to occur. But they cast that aside as time went on. And they moved the close of probation even to the first day of the 7th month in 1844. And then finally they had it at October 22, and then eventually most Adventists abandoned that, right? So what I want to show is that in Millerite history, there is, right? So we're going to say this is a close of probation, but we also had August 11th, 1840, that was perceived as a close of probation. So these parallels between these histories need to be understood. Now, and I've been trying to figure out how to present this simply. So it's not the easiest thing to do. Okay. So what we're going to do next week. So I've been really struggling with this. So I know I have to present these lines simply. But what we want to do next week is I want to backtrack again. I want to go over some of these things. because I don't think I understand the lines as well as I should. Because the more I study them, the more I see. So it's like every time I go over these lines, I start to understand them better. So obviously I could understand them better. And in trying to make things simple, I definitely need to know what points, because I just keep seeing things. So I need to know what points people need to understand. So people who are watching these videos, I want to have feedback. You can write your questions or your comments on the video itself on YouTube. What kind of things you're having trouble understanding, or even any ideas you have about these lines. But the basic principle that I see is that we didn't understand well enough is that when we zoom into a waymark, we have a different reform line that shares some of the same waymarks as another reform line. And so we can see that in Miller. He has a reform line. It goes up to the end of his prediction. But that's not the whole reform line of Millerite history, because Samuel Snow comes in and he has a reform line. He has a reform line of his letters, which we're going to have to look at and understand. But also he fits into this midnight cry Sunday law scenario with the first day of the first month. So hopefully this is going to be helpful, but I really do need feedback from people. So even if you think some of your questions are basic, just write them down on the YouTube video, and this will help me prepare for next week. Any final comments? Okay, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are grateful for the study today. We ask for a blessing for the rest of the week in our morning studies. I pray that your angels can watch over all of those who are studying truth, that your Holy Spirit can speak to our hearts, and that you can teach us, help us to learn of you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.